My name is AChildress, and today I will be talking to you about the S word. Now, I'm sure all of you know what the S word is already. Secularism. Now, you're probably thinking, Ainsley, that was so misleading. What about the actual S word? But honestly, by the end of this, you'll see why secularism is one of the most contested issues in America, and how its use is almost as powerful and controversial as a real S word. This brings me to my research question. To what extent is the United States a fundamentally secular nation? Ooh, there's the S word again. So how did I arrive at this question? Well, besides inspiration from the stimulus packet we all know and love, I had actually been curious about this topic before reading that. The good old Pledge of Allegiance. We all know it, we've all recited it, so you're probably already familiar with the words, "One nation under God." At my elementary school, I had to recite the pledge every morning for 6 years. While I myself am a pretty devout Christian, that phrase, "one nation under God," has always stood out to me. Why were my non-Christian classmates required by a public, government-funded school to utter pro-religious terms? Doesn't that mean the government is supporting Christianity when it's supposed to remain neutral, violating the First Amendment? And yes, I know that Christianity is not the only religion that believes in God. However, I chose to focus on Christianity because about 75% of Americans are Christian, and this religion was the most prominent during the founding of our nation, which I'll get to later. So it was this thinking of mine, coupled with these two stimulus sources, that led me to my question. I'll talk more about A Letter from Birmingham Jail later, but as for the piece Social Media and the Movement of Ideas by Edward Kessler, his idea of how our progressive world and its development can either foster or challenge a faith, it really shaped my question. Oops. So now for the answer to that question. Although the U.S. was founded to be a secular nation, in practice, the deeply ingrained Judeo-Christian values of the Founding Fathers permeated founding documents and seeped into American society, an issue rarely contested until the 1960s. Wow, that's a lot. Let's break it up piece by piece. Okay, piece 1. The U.S. was founded to be a secular nation. Despite the popular belief that the United States was originally founded as a Christian nation, the Founding Fathers actually sought to avoid church-state unions, outlining the U.S. as a sanction for religious tyranny. So in English, basically the Founding Fathers saw through England's monarchy the corruptive effects that concentrated religious power can have on a society, so they made it one of their primary goals to keep church and state separate when they founded the United States. In fact, the very first amendment of the Constitution states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So this is pretty straightforward already, but essentially Congress will neither suppress nor sponsor any religious practice, which draws a distinct line between religion and government in the U.S. So now that we've covered that, it's time for piece 2. The deeply ingrained Judeo-Christian values of the Founding Fathers permeated founding documents and seeped into American society. So basically, since all the Founding Fathers were Christian, it was sort of inevitable that their beliefs were going to slip into the documents they wrote when founding this country. No matter what secular intention they had, in reality, religious language did end up in founding documents, like the Declaration of Independence. In fact, in the very first line of the Declaration of Independence are the words, "Nature's God." And the second line, "They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." So as you can see, there's definitely religious language in the Declaration of Independence. However, we must consider purpose and context here. I wonder what the Declaration of Independence's purpose was. I don't know, maybe to declare independence. So that was its purpose, not to declare Christianity as a fundamental role in the foundation of the U.S. government. Also, the Declaration of Independence has no legally binding force, so it in no way characterizes the U.S. government as religiously affiliated. But again, we must consider context. Nearly 100% of the colonial American populace was Christian, so basically they saw this religious language in these documents and they were like, yes, we can use this to justify pro-Christian policies. And that's exactly what they did. In 1781, 5 years after this document was written, these Christian policies called the Blue Laws were established on a national level. These laws imposed the Christian practice of Sabbath onto the American people, which basically dedicated Sunday as a day of worship and rest. These laws were in direct violation of the Constitution's First Amendment, but obviously no one really cared because most people were Christian anyway. So basically, because the Founding Fathers were also religious, they couldn't completely filter out religious language from their documents, despite their secular intentions. A allowing the nearly homogeneous Christian society of that time period to use this language as a justification for illegal pro-Christian policies. Great, now for piece 3. An issue rarely contested until the 1960s. As I just said 5 seconds ago, everyone was Christian back then, so no one really questioned these policies. However, as the religious affiliation of the American populace began to diversify in the 1960s, the degree of the U.S.'s secularism on a political level started to be questioned. In Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter to Birmingham jail, he advocates for the return of the U.S. to its Christian roots. There was a time when the church was very powerful. In those days, the church was not merely a thermometer that recorded the ideas and principles of popular opinion. It was a thermostat that transformed the mores of society. Here, King is acknowledging the power that the Christian church used to have over early American society, which was facilitated by these pro-Christian policies. He expresses nostalgia for those uniformly Christian times, urging Americans to make the sacred heritage of our nation, or to restore the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God. These statements highlight both the perceived degree of Christianity that the U.S. government was thought to uphold, as well as the distance Americans have come from their formerly homogeneous Christian society. So what do we do now? So I basically just tell you 8 push, but what do we do with this information? Well, as I mentioned earlier about Edward Kessler's piece, the religious climate of the United States and the rest of the world is ever-changing. Since its founding, the religious identity of the American populace has significantly diversified from its nearly uniformly Christian roots. Thus, it has become increasingly imperative that our government remains secular not only in intention, but also in practice. We already have all the necessary infrastructure within our government to achieve this. Where the problem lies, however, is in human error, in the misinterpretation of our government's intentions. This can be combated, however, by simply considering context when disputing fundamental issues like these. Also, as I said before, I am a devout Christian, but I personally believe that the words "under God" should be taken out of the Pledge of Allegiance, or at least the pledge should not be enforced in public government-funded schools. There used to be a law in New Jersey requiring all public school students to recite the entire pledge. This has since been challenged with lengthy court cases. Now, when you take probably the 2 most controversial subjects ever, religion and politics, and you put them together, you're just asking for conflict. However, the Founding Fathers were actually very wise and far-sighted in setting secular policies for the U.S., and now these policies need to be respected rather than manipulated. No longer is the U.S. government only comprised of and representing Christians. The farther away in time we move from the foundation of America, the closer we must remain to its secular intentions to ensure liberty and justice for all faiths. Thank you.
Thank you, Ainsley. How did your research question evolve as you moved through the research process?
So originally, my research question sort of moved me in the direction of saying that the U.S. is fundamentally a Christian nation, and then I was just going to go through all the documents and say there's words like God in the Declaration of Independence. It's, at the bottom of the Constitution, it says like in the year of our Lord, 1787. But as I did more research, I realized you really have to consider context, and the Founding Fathers weren't doing all this to, make a statement about Christianity in our country. They were doing that because those were just their values, and they actually tried to separate church and state. So with more research, I was actually able to shape my question after already starting the research process, and I took a more neutral stance on that.
Nice. And what additional questions emerged from your research?
So after my research, I realized I mainly focused on Christianity, and I was sort of interested in the other monotheistic religions. Like I mentioned, Judeo-Christian values, and it would be interesting to focus on Judaism too, and also the Muslims in our country because they face a lot of discrimination, but they also believe in God, and so it would be interesting to sort of focus on that. Obviously, I didn't have time for that, but if I did, I definitely want to answer those questions.
Great, thank you.